and thus be compared in a different way than they should have, then a better question or a more accurate question would have. The problem is, I don't know how I would have asked the question to make it any more accurate, right? I could maybe take a stab at it, but I'm betting that the definition that I gave and the question that I asked would be just as likely to have people kind of in the wrong group, if you will, than this one is. And then the third problem is sampling bias, i.e., we're not really looking at all computer criminals and all other criminals, are we? We're only looking at those that A, got caught, and then B, got sentenced to prison, right? And I don't think people getting caught for computer crime are a good representative sample of all the people committing computer crime. Computer crime is one of those things where it's much easier to get away with it if you kind of know what you're doing and do it the right way. And so it's much more difficult to get caught, like drunk driving. People who drive drunk very, very, very rarely get caught, at least in my country. I'm not sure about yours. But you know, when people do get caught for drunk driving, it's not their first time they've done it, or the second time they've done it, or the third time they've done it. It's the 10th time they've done it, or the 15th time they've done it. And thus, it's not necessarily a representative sample of all those people who are actually committing the crime. It's much more likely to be a subtly different set of people than those that are kind of getting away with it and never getting caught. And in addition, if you're caught, you then have to go to prison, right? And so people in prison for computer crime are much more likely, well, our criminal justice system here has a problem with things like racial bias and gender bias and money bias, right? The rich get a much better outcome in courts than the poor do. So the important point here is that those we see in prison for these crimes aren't necessarily a good representative of the people out there committing these crimes. And that might, if it's the exact same effect for computer criminals and other criminals, our statistical analysis should still be accurate. But if computer criminals are different from the people committing those crimes in ways that are different than regular criminals are different from the people committing those crimes, that can cause a lot of bias problems. But here's the thing. So what? So what? What does this mean? What's the kind of grander lesson here? What's the bigger, more important kind of idea I want you to take away from this? Well, first off, we need to do an update. Okay, again, this data is from the mid-2000s. The survey I got the data from is traditionally done roughly every 10 years. They redo it again. And I haven't looked, although I should look to see if there's one from kind of the mid-2010s that's out that we can do a subsequent analysis on. But frankly, I just don't have the time or energy. But if anybody out there, if you want to come and partner with me on this and do an updated analysis and get that published, let me know. My email will be on the end of this presentation. But I am really burnt out, and I'm in the middle of writing a book. So if I'm the one that's going to be doing the update, that might take a while. And then the second big thing is that computer criminals are much more likely to be female than other criminals. And what does that mean for how we investigate cybercrime, how we prosecute cybercrime, how we teach cybercrime? we can't continue to treat computer crime as kind of this boys club, as this crime that is committed by young teenage boys. We have to start looking at computer crime not as the lark of young stupid male kids, but as a business and as a kind of a means to an end. We need to see it more like shoplifting, more like check fraud, more like these crimes that have a real world impact, that are very important, and they're not just being done as kind of the whims of, oh, boys will be boys. We need to look at why women are committing these crimes, how the techniques are being transferred. We really need to look more into the culture of how this is going on, because there's a definite subculture within computer crime, a very strong subculture. And I would love to do some qualitative analyses of really getting into what the modern hacker culture really looks like. And I want to see if there is more of a kind of gender acceptance than there is among, say, traditional gangs, right? Traditional gangs are very, very notorious for being kind of male only. So if we can get into that hacker subculture and look at kind of how gender is treated, I think that would be an incredibly important thing to know as criminal justice researchers. And the media representation of that, I think, needs to be updated, right? We need to stop having hackers and cyber criminals only being portrayed by white males. We need to have a representation of what these groups actually look like. We need to have women and minorities and things so that people will stop thinking of cybercrime as just this boys club thing. And then finally, cybercrime is growing. It's becoming more and more and more of a problem every year. We've got issues with everything we do at this point. You know, it's 2020. Everybody carries around a cell phone and a tablet and a laptop, and they have a desktop at home, and their car has a computer, and my thermostat at my old house was a computer, and the refrigerators connect to the internet, and everything is interconnected, and that gives so much more opportunity for cybercrime that it's definitely going to be a challenge. So we need to start looking more into cybercrime. We need to have more cybercrime research. Right now, it's such a small part of what criminal justice research focuses on. I go to these big, giant conferences that are all criminal justice, and cybercrime makes up what, 2%, 3% of all the different presentations, and that other stuff is important, but we need to realize that the world is changing, and cyber and criminal justice research needs to change with it. We need to look at the virtual world, because borders don't matter anymore. I can rob you from halfway across the world easier in many cases than I can rob people a few miles away. This interconnectedness gives our day-to-day lives so much more convenience, and it's wonderful, and I love all these technological innovations and all this cool stuff. But we really have to keep track of that and stay on kind of the leading edge of that with our research, especially in criminal justice, because if we don't, the consequences are going to be really, really bad. Cybercrime is already such a big problem, and if we don't kind of stay ahead of it in a legal sense, in a research sense, in a law enforcement sense, in all those different ways, we're going to have a huge problem. Okay, so here's the end of it. This is my email. I'm on Twitter, and I'm on YouTube. And YouTube is a great resource because I've recorded a bunch of my criminal justice lectures, and they're absolutely free and open for you to use. If anybody wants to use them to teach a course as supplemental materials for your students, anything you want. I have an Intro to Criminal Justice course, a Human Rights course, a Criminology course, and then most important for this presentation, I have my Introduction to Cybercrime course with all the lectures recorded, ready to go. And so please follow me there and feel free to use those videos in any way you need. And there will be more courses being put up soon. So anyway, any questions about this, this research in particular, cybercrime in general? What do you got for me?
Okay, questions, please. Does anyone have a question regarding the presentation of Dr. Jennings? Okay, classic, very classic Filipino, shy. Shy to ask questions.
Don't be shy. I have enough extroverted nature, and I like talking to people enough that I can overcome your shyness, I promise. If you have questions about American football, I can answer those too. Is trolling considered a crime in the US? So trolling is a very broad term. The vast majority of the time, no. It would fall under our free speech. The First Amendment to our Constitution protects free speech. So trolling would fall under that. But there are exceptions. If trolling became somehow an imminent threat of harm, that's not legally allowed. There was a court case recently about where a teenager kind of trolled or harassed somebody into committing suicide. That was not legally allowed. So trolling in general, the vast majority of the time, is perfectly legal. It's the point where it becomes kind of inciting imminent lawless action. That is when it ceases to be legal. And exactly where that line is, you're gonna have to ask a judge. It's going to be, you know, there's that gray area where a judge is going to have to determine whether it meets the criteria of imminent lawless action. Can you please elaborate on the impact of media representation on criminal research? So it's kind of a bigger. It's not a kind of a direct line I was trying to draw. It's more, as criminal researchers, we are just as susceptible to getting the stereotypes into our head as anybody else, right? Unless you are really specifically focused on one group of people, you know, like, for instance, I know nothing about serial killers. Like, I've got my PhD in criminal justice. I know some really basic stuff about murder, obviously, and forensics and blah, blah, blah. But I really don't know that much about serial killers. So I am just as susceptible to, like, the stereotypes and the media narrative about serial killers as anybody else. So if we can get an accurate portrayal of computer criminals into the media, we are going to be much more able to kind of use that to guide our research, use that to affect what we do and how we do it every day and what our research programs are about, if that makes sense. Is there cyber libel in the US and how is it treated? I don't think there's a separate law for cyber libel versus, say, in print libel. or spoken word libel, I should say. No, spoken word is slander. Print is libel. So I don't think there's the law treats libel any differently, whether it's in, say, a printed newspaper or an online forum. I believe they're treated the same way, but it's very difficult to get a libel action in the United States. But it's not a criminal action. That is a civil action, where kind of the government isn't really involved other than as judge. For libel, it would be a private person as the no, it's not the prosecution for them. It's the I'm not very good with civil law. It's the not the prosecution, the plaintiff. So it'd be a private person as the plaintiff, a private person as the defendant, and the judge. And nobody's going to prison over libel. The worst you can do is get fined a bunch of money. I have a question regarding crimes in the Philippines. Is it possible that it is easy to locate the suspect in identity theft? Oh, so this is one of the things I was talking about when I was talking about selection bias. It can be incredibly difficult to find people, especially in cases of, say, identity theft. If the person knows what they're doing to cover their tracks, it can be insanely difficult and never impossible. Like, it's never impossible to find somebody, but it can be incredibly, incredibly difficult. But if they don't take those steps to kind of cover their tracks and make it difficult to find them, it can be really easy. So it really depends on kind of how smart is the bad guy. How smart is the guy committing the identity theft crime? Hopefully, they're stupid. They don't take those basic steps to disguise who they are. Like, every time a computer connects to another computer, they have what's called an IP address. And that IP address is kind of unique to your house, at least, if not you specifically. So smart computer criminals will disguise that IP address and try to spoof their IP address or hide behind a proxy server, which disguises that IP address. And again, it doesn't make it impossible to find, but it makes it a little bit more difficult. So if the identity theft person takes those basic steps to make it harder to find them, it can be very difficult. If they're stupid and don't take those steps, it can be super easy. It really depends on the steps they take and what they do and how easy they make it for you, if that makes sense. Any other questions? How is the conference going other than this? This is what, day 3, right? I haven't had a chance to watch day 1 or 2. Is everything going well? Did you see some good presentation?
Well, yes, yesterday were presentations for science, technology, engineering, agriculture, and mathematics. So
oh wow, yeah,
we had
this
pretty
is really
good researchers presenting for that track session. And this afternoon we'll have Dr. Dennis with us, Dr. Lagumen. He'll be doing paneling for criminal justice and mental health and psychology.
Me and Dennis are old friends. We know each other. We've known each other for a few years now. He's a very, very smart man, great presenter. So I'm sure you guys are going to really love his presentation.
Yeah.
But again, please, if you have any more questions, please feel free to email me. Please feel free to contact me through Twitter. I'm trying to get more Twitter followers, and I'm trying to get more YouTube followers. If I hit 1,000, I can start making some money on it. So, subscribe to my channel on YouTube. It's Arresting Developments again. Mr. Maglicott or Dr. Maglicott, or I'm probably horribly butchering your name, and I apologize. But yeah, please feel free to ask a question live. Take yourself off mute and ask.
Good morning, sir. Good
Good evening.
Actually, one of your participants on your training in Manila, I think that was Diatel, some last year. My question, sir, is on in communication. And can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, a little bit. You're breaking up a little bit, but you said you had a question about the obscene communication.
Yes, sir. Yeah, obscene communication. Because in your research, uh, you presented that it older people and male. Then can we
Yeah.
consider obscene communication a crime? Considering how about if sending nude photos or videos or streaming or like they are lovers or they are in a long distance relationship, can we consider that as obscene communication if they have relationship, wife, husband, or girlfriend, boyfriend, or they are in LDR, long distance relationship, probably?
So, in the United States, that is perfectly legal. Right now I could disrobe and dance in front of all you people, and as long as everybody's over 18, no laws are being broken. The only thing that would make that illegal in the United States is if anybody either in the videos or watching the videos is under 18. If you're under 18, that is illegal. Even if, so what's interesting is everywhere in the country, it is illegal to be star in pornography until you're 18. But most states say you are legally allowed to have intercourse, have sex, younger than 18. So like in the state of Georgia, where I used to live, you could legally have sex with anybody you want to when you're 16, but you can't videotape it or take pictures of it until you're 18, which is kind of weird. That's one of the problems of our system, where we have federal law and then we have state laws, and the state laws are all different, and the federal law is the same. So when there's a conflict there, it can become very strange. So you're allowed to have sex when you're 16 or 17 in most states, but you're not allowed to record it until you're 18. But as long as everybody in the video and everybody watching the video is over the age of 18, it's not violating any laws, unless the only other places it could be illegal is if it involves animals, which obviously, scarily, is only illegal in roughly half the states. There's roughly half of the United States where even if there was a barnyard animal, that would still be perfectly legal, which not exactly my thing. Or if somebody is non-consenting, i.e., they did not consent to either A, have themselves filmed, or B, have that film released, then it is illegal in almost every state. But there are still some states where non-consensual pornography, i.e., you sent a picture to me, I share it with everybody. There are some states where that's still perfectly legal, which is very distressing. And there's no federal law against it yet. That's one of the things that our research on non-consensual pornography is kind of trying to get at, is we really need a federal law about this to make it illegal everywhere in the country, and not just rely on the states to make it illegal kind of piecemeal. So yeah, unless one of those situations exists, sending out any kind of pornography, long distance relationship, all that, get as naked as you want, do whatever sexual acts as you want. And again, unless it's, somebody's underage, somebody's non-consenting, or in some cases, other animals or something, outside of those situations, it's all perfectly legal.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Jennings. So we have here a comment from Dr. Eva Pakaira. Thank you, Dr. Jennings, for sharing the results of your research. I couldn't believe that there are more female hackers. That's a very interesting result.
So keep in mind, keep in mind, we're not comparing that to the world at large, i.e. it's not that more than 50% of all hackers are female. We're comparing it only to other criminals. So if, say, with most crimes, females only make up 10%, and computer crime, they make up 20%, they're still a small minority of all computer criminals. They're just much more likely to be female than other criminals where they're only 10. And I'm not saying it's 10 and 20%. I'm just picking numbers out of the air. But just keep in mind, we're not saying that more than 50% of all computer criminals are female. All right.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Jennings.
Thank you.
I appreciate very much our lecture this morning. So I hope you guys have learned a lot from Dr. Jennings' presentation. So it's almost 11. We'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll proceed to our second plenary speaker, Dr. Romel Sergio. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Have a great time with your other presenters, and please don't hesitate to contact me if you have any questions or comments or whatever. So thank you, and I will see you next time.
Thank you. So we're back. Hello, everyone. Is our audio okay? Okay. Thank you so much, Ma'am Eva. Okay, so earlier we had Dr. Jennings with us. That's a plenary session for criminal justice and psychology. Sorry, criminal justice. Now this afternoon, sorry, the second presenter rather, not this afternoon. So the second presenter or the second plenary session for this morning is going to be about mental health and psychology. So I believe Sir Romel is already with us. Our
Yes.
speaker is Dr. Romel Serio. He is from the Canadian University of Dubai. Sir Romel?
Yes. Hi there. Good morning. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm not sure if my camera has been blocked for some reasons. Can you just check, please? Yeah.
Okay, let's see. Hmm.
Yeah. I was trying at an earlier time. Nonetheless, if this one doesn't work, I can use my other device. Okay.
I did not block your camera, sir.
Okay.
I
No worries. Um,
also don't know
okay.
how to
Hold on.
block it
Probably
here.
I can use. Yeah. Hold on. Let me just probably I have to use another device if that's the case. I'm not sure. I just had the opportunity to try it at an earlier time. It just didn't go through. Okay, hold on. Can you give me a minute?
Yes,
I
sure.
can still hear you while I transfer to another device. Okay, apologies. Yeah.
Sure,
All right.
sir.
Yep. Sure.
Okay, so we're back. Dr. Sergio is back with us. Sir, I think you're on mute. Uh,
Hi there. Yep, there you go.
okay.
Apologies. Yeah, let me just share my screen so we can proceed further. Window. So when you share, will that be a window or a Chrome tab?
You can just share a window.
Okay, sure. There you go. Thank you. All right, shall I proceed?
Yes, sir. Sure.
All right. It's an honor to raise the affair. By all means, at this point in time, we're using more of the positive blade of technology, and that cuts through across time and location. So my greetings go straight from here in Dubai. We're in it's past 6 o'clock in the morning. So my greetings to the organizers, to the participants of the event, and so as the supporters, the sponsors of this year's International Integrated Research Conference. All right. The scenario we had at an earlier time is simply put as a test of mental health. So the topic that is in store for us today is more on the mental health in focus as part of the topical discussion, wherein the challenge of the time is manifested through the types of programs being offered across industry in relation to giving a weight on what we call silent pandemic even before coronavirus has arrived. I believe we already have the silent pandemic, which is in the form of mental health. And some of the research trends that we have today that would capture an essence of performing mental health related programs, not just in the Philippines, but globally. So I have flashed on the screen some of the pertinent information about my social media accounts. So if some of you would want to get in touch, especially if some of the questions may not be able to have some answers in today's session due to time allotment, please feel free to communicate further. Okay? So again, it's for me, it's a blessing that every time we have a discussion, regardless if it is pandemic or during the time of the pandemic, who would know we will have this kind of scenario wherein there's a huge chunk of a great deal of priority that will be placed in mental health as a focus. So I'll be mentioning some of the few conceptual definitions and the as per literature what mental health is about. And part of the global studies and the local studies, I'll be mentioning some of those as well that would pertain to the global situation when it comes to mental health. And some of the mental health programs that when you do a trajectory of these studies, in reality, how does it look like in the new normal that we have the mental health programs floating, regardless if it is a private or government entity. And then, of course, when we consider what lies ahead and what it is going on right now, especially for researchers who are in this particular conference or attending this conference, I'm sure they'll be able to relate more of their experience, especially if they have already conducted a paper related to mental health that happened to be within the pandemic time, right? So that will be part of the encompassing topic for this discussion. And before I plunge into a more detailed view on mental health with regard to some figures abroad and in the Philippines, it's good to have a run through of what mental health is according to experts, particularly if we are to take into account the World Health Organization's perspective. But there must be a balance among these three. So you have your physical well-being, which will basically entail our ability to take the proper nutrients that is expected of us to look into, especially at this point in time, where it's not just the social distancing we have to do, but if you will not socially distance yourself from your refrigerator, for instance, that will definitely create a stance, with regard to your physical well-being. Exercise, for example, is part of that. And we have mental well-being, which is more on the psychological well-being, and social well-being pertains to our sustaining relationship with our loved ones, with our significant others. And these three happen to be a baseline, an endpoint, where you would say that if one over the other is not properly nurtured and balanced, then it would result to poor mental health, and at this extreme, it could lead to mental health aberration or mental disorder. Okay. And literature-wise, if we would see the three major factors, there could be more, but it's a combination probably of one or two of these factors. You have the biological factors, which psychologically you would say that people of age, for example, if it is a female, they're more prone to depression. If that is the case, if you have comorbidity, that means you have at least two diseases that would happen at one point in time that can contribute to your depressive episodes, among others. You also have psychological factors, which in turn, in some of the literature, can say that it can be called social factors as well, depending on which angle you're looking into. So unemployment can be part of that. We have a lot of people not just in the Philippines, but from around the world who are suffering from financial losses, among other negative life events. And in social factors, we have to take into account some major variables like marital status, poor social support, among others. Okay. This is entirely what majority or vast literature would support in terms of what steers a mentally healthy person, or on the other side, the opposite, that would have a blow on your mental health, if that is the case. If that will be more on the negative side. Okay, so what is alarming is that even before the pandemic, is that the Mental Health Foundation, through the World Health Organization, has forecasted that even in 2030, depression will be the leading illness globally. And this is not exactly far from the statistics that can be found in the Philippines as well, as we discuss related figures that happens to abound within the Philippine setting. Okay. So part of the global studies in terms of the mental disorders, I try to get more of the work-related mental disorders that are a national priority. And in this figure, you would see that, of course, for individuals, normally we experience a lot of stressors at work and even outside work that we come to bring at work, if in case that's something personal. And a wide variety of different illnesses, such as anxiety disorders. So in this case, if you're a type of person who panics, most of the time, or at least in the last 2 weeks, it could be more than 2 weeks. Make sure that you know all the signs in here, such as your inability to eat, or maybe, other than loss of appetite, you can also consider factors like overeating. So that it could be the extremes as well when you talk about the symptoms. It's so close to depression in terms of the signs, in the sense that there's only a few differences underlying these two. So the signs would definitely be more on your inability to sleep, or you sleep a lot. So you can either swing between insomnia and hypersomnia. Hypersomnia is your ability to sleep for longer hours. I even have seen a client of ours here in the UAE, from which that person can stretch himself to sleep up to 18 hours. Okay? And in depression case that we have, it's most of the time looking into the aspect of hope, where the person is losing a sense of courage and hope to be able to cope with the demands in his or her environment. So these are just some of the figures that we would see even before the pandemic. Experts would say the figures may have doubled, or at some extent may have tripled. It may take a year or two, according to experts, before the new global study would come out. And what is perpetuating on the side is the fact that other than work pressures, harassment and or bullying may also happen that would trigger an alarm when it comes to having an anxiety or depression, or the mix of it. This is where the aspect of the combination of the features of mental health would happen. All right, and it's interesting how we would see that most at-risk occupations that we can find nowadays in the forefront, which we all know are the occupations truly at risk, would be not as different even before the pandemic. So these individuals are, somehow occupying or experiencing more of stressful situations than not. So another interesting part of the global studies, before I hit on the local studies in the Philippines and here in the UAE, interestingly, 40% of employees with a mental illness take time off because of it. So you may have an employee that may definitely hide the real reason of absence. That person may take up to 10 days a year, okay? And that's quite a big figure, right? And mental illnesses are, of course, the leading cause of disability worldwide. Another figure that we will come to see in the open part of the global studies would be more than 35% of managers feel they receive no formal support or resources to help employees. Imagine this is already on the level of manager or managers themselves who claim that there's no formal support. And I wish that even the budgetary allowance that we have, which is not even reaching to 5% in the Philippines, would be more prioritized than not. In the UAE, for instance, we have part of the national priority is to even include in the insurance package of the employees a section wherein they can consult with regard to whichever mental health concern that they may have, and that's really a big assistance for the OFW just like me to have an early diagnosis if in case you feel like there's something that must be attended to. Also on the side, this international study that has been published a year back would claim that 1 in 10 full-time employees would probably have an addiction. It could be related to drug addiction or some other factors like the use of device, among other identified addictive circumstance. And last but not the least, in this particular study, HR managers know the toll mental illness can take on the company, and yet only 15% of field managers are training to recognize the problem and share support and resources. So in reality, the figures are alarming. And the reason why I'm saying it's indeed a silent pandemic mental health concern in general. It's not just because of the overwhelming number during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic. So in reality, if employees are engaged and they have most likely a very good workplace wellness programs, most likely we will be able to reduce healthcare costs by 60%. And this again is still part of the global studies. Let's center our attention on the Philippines state of affairs when it comes to mental health illness or mental health concern rather. In the profile, we have around 7 to 20% Filipino adults who are experiencing psychiatric disorder, and around 10 to 15% Filipino children are also in the same flight. But unfortunately, when it comes to these cases, for instance, 88 cases of mental health problems for every 100,000 Filipinos would be noted. And this is part of the study in the Philippines back in 2017. In that particular study, we can also, I mentioned at an earlier time that around 5% of the health department's total annual budget is attributed for mental health or to attend to mental health of Filipinos. Particularly, this is a concern in the country. Now, if you were to generalize or to give more specific weight on the figures, among the 10 million Filipinos, we only have an available number of 700 psychiatrists. It could be 15 to 20% addition to this number, knowing that this has been part of the study in the past 3 years. And so was 1,000 psychiatric nurses. Some of these are psychologists and trained mental health practitioners. So you can see that in the global scene, if we have noted that part of the forecast is that depression will be the leading mental health concern worldwide, in the Philippines, you can also see the pattern, right? So as I mentioned earlier on, if you have depressive episodes, most likely you want to end your life, but that's the new term that we're using right now. I mean, at this moment is that you have the capacity to hurt yourself or other individuals. So self-harm could be an indicator. But among the so many signs of depression, other than those that I have mentioned at an earlier time, would be, again, the lack of hope and your suicidal ideation, right? And we have anxiety disorders, which have a lot of forms as well. Here, instead of having very low energy, at times there's a flush of adrenaline, wherein if you come to hear, for instance, just a tone of a siren, you have to jolt out of your seat and even shout or have irrational behavior. And in the post-traumatic stress disorders, this come into play if you have, unfortunately, some sort of unfortunate events such as accident, for instance. That whenever you have the feeling that you're kind of conditioned to that particular circumstance, replicating a situation of that particular accident would bring back the moment and the feeling of your being stressed. Okay? So this comes into play when you come to work and you have been feeling obviously a not so normal feeling, thinking, and it goes with your behavior as well. So these are just some of the citations from this particular study. And part of our studies conducted here in the UAE, when it comes to the struggle of a typical overseas Filipino worker, we've seen a lot of circumstances like the loss of jobs. So they themselves are saying that these are the sources of their depression. So among around 320 individuals who were part of our counseling program, declared the fact that the loss of jobs happened to be a big deal. I mean, it's part of the source of their depression. And some of them have already went out of the UAE due to downsizing measures. So pay cut is another case. Went up to 50% of the salary slash. Up to now, some industries have not resumed the original rate given to our kababayans, to the Filipinos in here. And some of these residents here in the UAE are not entirely residents. They lost their job and they're still in the process of searching for a new job. So another case that we have part of this study in the UAE is the months without pay and uncertain when to report to work, especially for those who are working in hotel. That industry, some of the hotels here are still closed and they are still left in the accommodation with nothing. Okay, so that's, I think, worth sharing that information, part of the study we have conducted here a month back. And the stories of the pandemic itself is a factor why many of the overseas Filipino workers still feel that the impact of the pandemic is indeed remarkable and unparalleled. See, the COVID-19 stories of grief and suffering is something that still contributes to that sense of worry that many of our kabayans face. And some other factors like their inability to communicate with their loved ones. Some of them are still adamant to tell the real life story happening within the area. And this is common among Filipinos, having that kind of perception that, I don't want my family members to worry. They may not know that I don't really have a job, but they still manage to send something back home. And indeed, the struggle of a typical Filipino, you would say, is real. All right, so lockdown in itself would be a factor, especially in the past months. Okay. Definitely not these days, but then in reality, you have those part of the experience. Now, the unique challenges during the pandemic in the global studies would also lead to some of these factors, of course, not limited to, like our disruptions in social and peer relationships. It's so true that the individuals from around the world would have a confession that being deprived to express physically what you feel, what you think, would be uneasy, knowing that, especially for Filipinos, like, we're very welcoming and our interaction with one another would really spell a lot of difference. There's also a part of the unique challenge is a set of milestones that you miss, not just graduation. Some of you may have your brother, your sister, wife, or husband coming over, supposed to be in a specific month for an occasion, or even without an occasion, that's specifically a month wherein you celebrate moments with your loved ones abroad, but that didn't happen. Among any internal prohibitions when it comes to attending events, and this is part of the second portion in here. We also have managing mental health conditions that existed before the pandemic. They're very much difficult for our compatriots who are in need of psychological support, and they just can't specifically go to a clinic or a center wherein they have to continue their medication or their therapy. Right? And this is part of, indeed, the global studies that we would see. Communication challenges with parents could be one of those that truly, without these specific studies, you can conclude that it's really happening in the open. So let's discuss more of the positive side. If we come to manage employee wellness, there are a lot of specific circumstances wherein if some of you happen to be in the university or in the educational front, you would, just like a typical customer wherein you would say, be good to your customer as an employee because the rest will follow. Same thing that is applied for teachers, for example. To promote success in schools particularly, we claim that focusing on teachers' well-being could create a very good impact and an impetus when it comes to changing the landscape or improving the landscape of education. And more so in this particular discussion point, regardless of the industry, still part of the global studies is that wellness engagement programs would definitely impact workers' ability to perform very well inside the workplace. So the figures in itself would give us an idea that retention could be higher if will definitely be higher than not if you have a well-formed, well-crafted engagement or wellness program in the workplace. So that leads me to embracing the new normal, wherein I have compiled different sets of strategies, interventions, and you may call it programs inside the workplace that could be adjacent to the usual on-site. So many of these activities happen to be online nowadays, but it should not prevent us from becoming better when it comes to those core dimensions that I was able to discuss earlier from World Health Organizations, such as the physical, the mental, and the social aspects of our well-being. For instance, in today's world, part of the inter-industry studies, we are to take into account the vitality or the appropriateness of the programs that we intend to introduce. Right, we have free health screening that most of the time would happen physically, and some organizations from here and around the globe would even have it also here in the UAE, from which even if it is a time for women, for example, to undergo some tests, the doctors will be available, the Zoom meetings are available, whichever platform there may be. And even the medications can be generated through an electronic system, and that's coursed through in the pharmacy that that particular hospital has been affiliated. So some of these may not entirely be happening in the Philippines, but it could probably happen one of these days, since our priority is the mental health of our workers. And we also have counseling centers or services. In the Philippines, it's not a surprise because during the pandemic, the online counseling program from Ugat Sandaline, that's a free counseling program that Ateneo University has established together with ABS-CBN and the partnering group here in the UAE that we have established. That's the Philippine Psychological Association, wherein we work hand in hand to provide psychological first aid. And gladly, I've seen a lot of companies, even Unilever has come up with this particular setup, wherein the counseling centers can either be internal to them, or if depends on the availability of the internal support that they have, they also outsource counseling centers that these employees can depend on. And IBM, Google is also existing here in the UAE. We have it in Media City. And these counseling services, counseling centers are definitely definitely something that is available for the employees. And of course, on the side, you have mental health awareness. In many ways, it could be through your portals. There's this daily tidbits for your employees, what they need to be aware of in terms of the food that they can eat. For instance, there are food or nutritious food that are recommended, such as banana, strawberry, for instance. Even eggs could be a good source of happiness booster, and that's part of the mental health awareness programs that many organizations here and in abroad have been doing. And I'm sure the Philippines is not left out in this case, knowing that we have a lot of experts in the area as well. So it depends solely on which company we belong. If that's small and medium scale organizations, most likely they may not be able to have that flexibility and urgency to have those mental health awareness programs run inside the workplace. But most likely part of the mental health awareness, it may specifically come in the e-tools and newsletters that the organization would have. And the online or on-site, especially for those who are back working on-site, there could be a pretty much combination of physical exercise and maybe online or on-site. Those individuals who are into dancing classes that will be related to physical well-being, that's entirely available in many organizations. And other forms could be the combination of these or a revised version of what I have mentioned. So this is part of the benchmarking in line with 10 different studies that I have come across with. Right? And bridging the last part of my discussion would be related to the different trends in conducting mental health research, but most likely the social sciences field, such as psychology, or sociology rather. You have even political science that would be indicative of law and mental health rolled into one. There are trends that are definitely already in there even before the pandemic, and that would continue with some add-ons in it. For example, in my experience as an editor in the Scopus publication, I would see the replication crisis. So in this case, you would see individuals who have the tendency to see the outcome, to verify further if the outcome will be the same, if in case you'll be performing the same set of process in your methodology. And that leads to crisis at some extent because the design of the research paper, once you replicate them, definitely you have to be very careful in how you frame your methods. A bit of a change would lead to some sort of bias that would be questionable for some editors to look at when they verify the veracity, when they look into the veracity of the publication that they're into. And also the use of technologies become prevalent nowadays. Even the interviews that we're doing is kind of fed in some application software for qualitative designs, and a lot more to the use of technology. Even the gathering of data nowadays would not be physical due to this pandemic. So it's really trendy. You may call it a fad or a craze because of these changes. Multi-methods will still continue part of conducting research while you have your triangulation method. A big question on the typological theorizing, whether it should be a grounded theory or a critic of a theory. Then the ethics in research will definitely continue as a trend. So now, even if you would consider, not of legal age, participants, you need to consider also getting a consent other than them signing it. The parents need to be involved in that ethical cycle of conducting research. So most likely, if you are having your research part of the university's research grant, most likely you need to really prepare your ethic. I mean, you need to really comply with the ethical standards of the university. Having said that, you have your ethics committee. And most of these mental health researches would lead, according to experts, would lead to policy relevant research, especially those who are into action research. And the duration of the paper, the writing in itself, prior to publication, according to experts, would be from 3 to 6 months. And this is a good thing to look into, knowing that we're using technology at its peak. And I'm sure pretty much that many of you who have been into the actual conduct of research have experienced a year or two, prior to the publication. So that's entirely good news. And the last segment of my discussion would be related still to part 2 of trends, and this vitality of research across fields, interdisciplinary in scope, would be another good news in the end. But then, of course, there are dominant social sciences that would be more connected to the study of mental health, other than medical science itself. We have more projections on research professionalization, wherein it's not just the observance of research, but knowing that we're regulated even by CHED in the Philippines and outside the Philippines, the Ministry of Education, if you may call it so, counterpart of CHED, would require a similar decision to accept Scopus-based publications. And that's part of professionalizing the academia. And for to the last item in here is the increased quality of reports. They say that for you to publish your work and then eventually convert these into like encapsulated report, like what I have shown in terms of the actual percentages, that will be most likely be found in social media like Facebook or even in LinkedIn, whenever possible, that you convert those lengthy text-heavy reports into something that in a spur of a moment will be able to see the quality of the discussion as part of the turnout of the reports. And there may be some methodological changes, like those that are purely qualitative in scope, according to many experts in the field. The use of phenomenological study, among other ways, such as content analysis, could be a good frame of reference, because we're considering life experiences of people. Their lived experience, especially at this point in time, is pandemic, is something that would create a difference when it comes to knowing the actual scenario that have occurred at some point in time. And there will be definitely increased collaboration. This is very common nowadays, especially for those who are entirely building their portfolio. If mental health happens to be a variable of your own choice, then distance is no longer a hindrance. As part of my introductory statement at an earlier time, my prelude leads you to that moment that there is indeed a great deal of looking into what we call the use of technology, regardless of distance and time difference, right? And of course, the increased collaboration that I mentioned would definitely be a projection. And our study, the specific location, its specificity could be one of the major considerations. Not just the setting, but it's more on the specific research locale that your study has been conducted. So let me just say that in promoting mental health at work through HR, there is no doubt that employee engagement would be evident with the novel COVID-19 that has toppled countless lives. And that's definitely evident. We can see the figures floating from one country over the other. Brought about unemployment and financial concerns, it is vital that mental health programs are operational across organizations. And with that, I say thank you very much. These are just some of the references I've used. I also provided some helpful links with some of these happen to have videos, having yours truly being featured in different platforms. Okay. I call it a very good encounter. That floor is now open for any question that you may have.
Okay. So do you have any questions? You may, if you're camera shy, you can just type it on the chat box, just like earlier.
All right.
Anyone?
Feel free to ask questions.
Yeah, don't be intimidated. Dr. Sergio is very friendly.
Thank you for some of the comments that I can find in our chat box. I had to rush a bit because of the short glitch we have. It's a challenge of mental health for presenters like me. That happens once in a while. It's my first in the last 4 months that I'm conducting a regular webinar, when it comes to mental health. Maybe because of the change of system. Not sure my not adapted enough. But anyway, sir, would you want to read the questions if you have them?
Yeah, we have a question here from Ms. Maria Rosario Victoria de Guzman. Can you please expound more on mental health research trends, replication crisis?
Right. So in today's world, as I have said, part of the regulation is to write in Scopus publications. Fortunately, yours truly happened to have a full grasp of the trends there are. And in many cases, if it's a replication study, we see a crisis inside it in the sense that you don't exactly, researchers of today may not exactly be aware of the repercussions of the replication study. So you're just saying that part of the assumption is that if variable A, for example, affects variable B, and there's a common range of findings that you can see in the Western side, and you want to test, for example, if that same outcome would happen, in the area of your own choice, particularly if it is in the Philippines, and it didn't happen, part of your results. So that could be really that can really be a challenge. So the replication crisis comes in two forms. One is that you thought that what you have done is already correct, but upon verification by a typical editor, they would find some lapses with the way you have replicated the study. So there's a crisis there. It means that a little tweaking that you would be doing, such as the differences on the number of participants there are as to their characteristics, that can have a twist on the result of your study. So imagine, just for example, if you would see that IQ and EQ does not really connect. There's no relationship when you see statistically the global studies. In your study, there was a strong relationship. Okay, and that in itself would indicate that you're bumping into something that has already been established in terms of the universal set of findings. The second one is more on faking the actual, process of doing the paper in itself. But the reality is that even a change of the instrument would create an impact on the veracity of your paper. So editors nowadays, there are much, especially if you're publishing in Q1 and Q2 Scopus journals, they will definitely ask for a lot of evidences and information how you were able to perform your research at that. So that's a very good question from Ma'am Maria Rosario, in that aspect of replication crisis. So the thing is, some other publications, especially if it is Q1 and Q2, they will not be able to consider the publication in itself if they would see it's a replicated type of paper. Q3 and Q4 may go that far and still consider, but again, they have their own way to trash out, vital information related to the process of conducting the replicated version of the paper. Yeah. I
Okay.
hope I answered that question.
Okay, so we also have another question, sir. This is from Dr. Jordan Galliano. He says, how can I tell if someone has a mental health problem?
Okay. Mental health is a huge. It's really a big part of a question of the equation, in a sense that it depends on which kind of disorder we're talking about. So if that's related to the signs I've mentioned, like if it is depression, which is the number one or the leading mental health mental disorder, if you may say so, in the Philippines and global in scope. Some signs like the person's inability to sleep. So if the sleeping patterns, at least for the last 2 weeks, have been distorted, that could be a sign. Among the 9 different signs, clinical signs, we also have, or it could be the extreme, your ability to really sleep for a long period of time, like the example that I had given at an earlier time. That some people, as I have mentioned, our clients here would even have 18 hours of sleep. They will just wake up to eat and then they will sleep again. Okay, and that's what you call hypersomnia instead of insomnia. Other individuals would have withdrawal, symptoms, their inability to eat, loss of appetite, or the extreme. You have the capacity to, in that case, sabi ko nga kanina, you may have the ability, this thinking that it's not just social distancing that you need to focus on, but you also need to distance yourself in your refrigerator, because there's this, proneness that you think that to be able to cope, you need to eat a lot, especially if what you're taking is not exactly healthy, kind of food, then that will definitely have a spike in your weight, right? And of course, the loss of hope. In that case, people who are overly negative, and that negativity would definitely be attributed to their feeling and belief that there's no good thing that will happen, right? And that entertaining of thought that suicide is good or self-harm is good, or sometimes the ability to harm other people as well, right? So if we are to select one specific kind of illness, which I prefer to have it as in part of depression, it's solely because it's the leading illness, in our current time. Okay? So it's so obvious that we have a lot of compatriots who are experiencing that even before the pandemic due to so many factors. So it may be economic. Most likely, again, if one of the parents would have depressive episodes, most likely you would have it too, because it's biologically inherited. So those are just
Okay.
some of the signs.
Yeah. So thank you for that. Next question. We have one from Sir John Rogel Ursua. He says, What is the difference between multi-method and mixed method? Thank you.
Okay. Multi-method and mixed method in so many cases happen to be the same because you're considering two methods. For example, if it's a mixed method, let's just say observation method and survey method, right? So that could be part of that. As long as you're having more than one uh, method, there is a combination of two or more, especially if you're using three, which we call triangulation, that will be a mixed method. Okay. So there's no much of a difference between these two terms. There may be still part of the literature that identifies a few differences in between these two, just to be more fixated on the kind of method. Like if it is entirely the most commonly used method, that you may say it's a mixed method of survey and interview method, for instance, because observation may not entirely be a preferred method all the time due to some other considerations like it's being prone to bias and among other assumptions there are. So yeah, but most likely we were saying that they are really intertwined, these two terms.
Okay. We have another question from Mr. Mark Anthony Refugio. Can a person be able to cope up by himself or with the help of family or government agencies?
Okay, that's the main question. Um, in today's world, depending on the kind of gravity of a particular illness would be, if it is stress, which normal individuals would experience, sabi nga dun sa, there's a lot of survey instruments that we have right now that would pertain to, a short peek on the state of your mental condition or mental health situation. And one of these would say that if you're not depressed, if you're not stressed, nowadays you're not normal. You're like a superhuman, So that seems to be like a new normal. That at least in that scale, having a point of 1 to 50, just for example, having 1 to 9 could still be normal, something to that effect. But to answer this question, you'll be able to cope with your own problem by your own self if you're a resilient person. We have different personalities, and that also contribute to our being resilient. If you're a person who's overly negative, and probably you have known one or two or many of these people, especially nowadays in social media, a short statement of yours, some other people would take it negatively and would interact with you negatively. And these people may have a different set of coping mechanism, which may not be as effective as yours. If you happen to be kind of a person who's really positive and you're receptive to changes, I think you have more vitality to cope with the demands of time. So it would solely be dependent. There's no specific formula or indicator that would say that generally this is what it should be or that this is what it can be. So definitely, if you're using humanistic psychology as a point of view, you are capable of solving your own problems. But then, what if your core is not as strong as others would have? So that means you need to really reach out. And reaching out would mean, I don't mean immediately a psychologist. Nowadays in the Philippines or even outside the Philippines, we have the so-called psychological first aid. Try to type Ugat Sandaline and you would find this counseling program that I was talking about, part of the intervention. Luckily, we have it even before the pandemic. It's just that it's not really hyped as what it is right now. And it's 7 days a week, but there are specific time because we have volunteers from the UAE, where I am, and in the Philippines percent. It's offered for Filipinos, exclusively for Filipinos, in the Philippines, in the Middle East, or even in Europe. So it's a form of reaching out, if in case you feel that you really have this distinct um, way of thinking, behaving, and the way you feel, the way you see and view things as they are, may not be as normal as what it used to be in the past. So try to reach out. So that psychological first aid that I'm talking about, although of course there are a lot of experts in that counseling platform that you can depend on. So don't be afraid, don't be shy. You're not alone in this battle. You have some people who would definitely extend their time for people like those that you come to know. It may not exactly be you, right? So helping these people one at a time, saving one soul at a time is our mission. Once we have done that one at a time, we're already successful in our advocacy. Yeah.
Okay. I think we have last two questions here.
Go ahead, sir.
One is from can work stress be considered as mental health problem?
Yeah, okay. Very good question po yung kay Remery, I think. That's the question, right? From her, Remery. It can be called a mental health problem because all of us, you see, it's like a pendulum, that at one point you can be at your best. Having said that, there's a balance on those three aspects that I've mentioned. So you have your physical, it seems that you're doing a regular exercise, your diet and all that. So that will be in the physical. You have your mental and your social. If these are balanced at the onset, at the peak, you have the mental health per se. In the middle, normal individuals experience stress. So this is where it is. Wherein your mental health can spike from the peak down to the middle, but not exactly on the ground, which means that you can experience poor mental health. We may call it like that, or you may be experiencing some maladjustments. This is normal. It's like your experience if in case you have a change of job, you're adapting, and some of you may have experienced how to be bullied, by some of your office mates, and it's part of that hit of our core. So we all experience a bumpy road at the end of the day, but then it's how we handle those. So I would say yes. At the point wherein you would feel like surrendering and you feel like it's so difficult to handle, so work stress can be part of that. So part of the global study I mentioned at an earlier time is that work stress is contributory to our mental health problem, right? So that's basically part of that.
Thank you, Sir Rommel. Lastly, I have a question here. Good morning, sir. How about if someone is in the state of hanging himself, does he have a mental disorder?
Yep, definitely. Because part of the 9 signs I've mentioned at an earlier time, especially if it is related to depression. Depression is a standout illness wherein there's a tendency to end himself or herself by a specific means. So all of these disorders have similarities. You can function normally as a son, as a daughter, as a worker, as a professional, for instance, as a wife or as a husband, regardless of your social status, you can't just function the normal way. So once you are neglecting your responsibilities, you're avoiding people, and people don't understand where you're going through, you're probably having one of the illnesses there are, and one of which could be depression. Depression is one indicator that a person would want to hurt himself or end his life. So imagine if that hope, that 4-letter word that I shared at an earlier time is absent in the picture, you won't be able to appreciate the beauty of life. No matter how good things come your way, that would come your way, you won't be able to notice any of these positive changes solely because your feeling is that you're miserable. This is the part wherein Even when you are pinched physically, you won't be able to feel something when you are at that peak of depression, because numbness is also one of the signs of depressive episodes. So yes, it is conclusive that that person who wants to harm himself or herself, that's indicative of mental disorder, particularly depression. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Sir Romel. We've learned a lot. The
Thank you
topic is
very
very
much.
timely, especially in
Yes.
this time of the pandemic. And I also hope that our fellow researchers here in this conference has learned a lot from the topic today. So once again, thank you very much. And mabuhay. Palakpakan naman natin si Sir Romel.
All the
Virtual
best.
back.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, guys. So later, so that's the end of our plenary session for this morning. And so in the afternoon, we will have research presentations. First, we will begin at 1 p.m. Research presentations from mental health and psychology. Our panelist is Dr. Carlita Digula. And then we also have at 2 p.m. probably we'll have the criminal justice. So under criminal justice, our panelist is Dr. Lagumen. So let me see. We have how many? Seven presenters at 1 p.m. to 2 p.m. Hopefully they finish around 2:30. And then we also have for criminal justice, we have okay, around seven panelists then. So I hope our sorry, seven presenters. So I hope you will be on time. We start exactly 1 p.m. this afternoon. So please be ready. Again, I would like to reiterate that if possible, you are encouraged to present live. However, we all know that the internet is bad, plus the rainy weather, so it's double whammy. So we consider playing your video. So that's why we have, or we encourage you or required you to submit a video to us. So if I call your name earlier or later, if I call your name and you pretty much notice that you have a bad signal, just tell me, text or chat me here on the chat box. Sir, can you play my presentation? Or ahead of time, if it's almost you're about to be called, you're the next presenter, let's say, tell me ahead of time so that I can ready your presentation. Okay, so let's have a break. Our session resumes at 1 p.m. Thank you very much.